Wilfrid Sellars, a 20th century philosopher, once said that the aim of philosophy was to understand how things in the broadest possible sense of the term hang together. So in that spirit, I think there have been all of these talks about things over the last couple of days: thermodynamics, the arrow of time, information, agency, computation, science, pieces of mathematics that have been introduced to systematize various bits of this, that I think it might be useful at this stage to kind of assemble into a general picture of the overarching theme of the conference, namely trying to arrive at some understanding of how the mind and intelligence might have emerged in nature. So it's not clear to me that that's been done yet, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay. So starting with Sean's talk, I think, and this is a picture, no, wait, I'm back. It's a picture I stole from him firsthand, not secondhand. And the physics that's most directly relevant to the emergence of intelligence, namely the understanding of how the local macroscopic asymmetries in our part of the universe probably have their origin in a low entropy initial state that develops under effectively classical laws into a world with the emergent macroscopic asymmetries captured in thermodynamic generalizations. So the thermodynamic gradient is what creates the conditions that form the backdrop for the emergence of complexity and eventually life. In scientific terms, how complexity began to emerge and develop into life isn't, of course, really known. We know it happens. One can get clues by looking at the dynamics of systems starting in a low entropy state and approaching equilibrium. It almost certainly involves some mix of self-organization and selection, so the world produces complex systems, some of which manage to maintain stable configurations. Once there are systems capable of self-replication with variation and selection, so we have systems that are reproducing themselves with some mutation, and a selection mechanism operating. This launches a process of Darwinian evolution. We don't have to draw a sharp line between life and non-life if we're content to start with something simple like a self-replicating molecule and just see how Darwinian evolution over a sufficiently long extended period would produce something that's kind of indisputably or recognizably alive, clearly on the side of life. So then evolution at the long time scale is an effective search mechanism for complex systems that are able to survive and reproduce, and this means a lot of different things. It means being able to meet their own energy requirements by converting energy from the environment into work. It means competing for resources, resisting predators, adapting to change. And it turns out that a very valuable commodity in all of this is the ability to capture and use information. Now, this is something that emerges from the evolutionary record, rather than something that one would guess just by looking at the equations, though Paul and Sarah were both offering some insights into why that might be so. The underlying physics makes possible all kinds of high-level configurations. Selection vectors act on emergent functionalities of systems at a high degree of physical complexity, far from equilibrium, and in specialized environments, including, of course, ecological niches produced, and in some cases self-consciously constructed by the organisms themselves. The ones that get selected, survive, and are preserved by evolutionary dynamics, and hence the ones that populate our world, are the ones that utilize and process information in effective ways. So it's sometimes said that the information age started in the 1970s, but as Paul emphasized in his talk, nature discovered the utility of information long before we did. And the locus classicus of discussion of the role of information is this book from Zathmary and Smith, who argued that major evolutionary transitions involve changes in the way that information is stored and transmitted. The leaps that the universe has made, convincingly argued, from non-life to life, chemical reaction to mind, individualism to society, can all be seen as occurring when information previously lost to noise is made available to do causal work. So here's how this works with living systems, with living creatures, and what it has to do with thermodynamics. We know that macro irreversibility is compatible with micro reversibility. So microscopically, there are local processes happening in accord with unchanging microscopic laws. Macroscopically, we see irreversible processes both locally in adiabatically isolated subsystems and at the global level in the direction of increasing entropy. The low entropy boundary condition in the past makes it possible for information about the macroscopic past to accumulate in the form of records. So the macroscopic world, where there's a thermodynamic gradient, is littered with records that contain the imprint of macroscopic history. A footprint in the sand was overwhelmingly likely to have been made by a passing human. A half-melted ice cube in a glass of warm water was recently a fully formed ice cube put into the water. A photograph, a series of letters on a piece of paper, all of the semi-ordered, approximately adiabatically isolated systems you see around you are evolving from states of even higher entropy and bear the imprint of their pasts. So the macroscopic development of those systems, left to their own devices, of course, will follow its ordinary course, dissipating energy into the environment. Footprints will wash away, ice will melt, but evolution populates the universe with open systems using energy from the environment to maintain their own entropy, dissipating heat and using information to guide behavior. The information contained in the macroscopic environment, that is in the present state of systems evolving from lower to higher entropy, higher to lower entropy, is available to other systems to use as a basis for their own behavior. So if it's not immediately obvious why the ability to read information about the past provides a selective advantage, think of it this way: a deer that can read the signs of a recent lion hunt, or a predator who knows that a beaver dam means a beaver will do better than one that doesn't. A creature that knows what happened, knows something about what's going to happen. More precisely, a creature that knows something about the macroscopic past knows more about the macroscopic future than it would by simply evolving forward a probability distribution over the present macrostate in accord with the laws. Conditionalizing on a low entropy boundary condition in the past is what adds that information. It's what makes the present macro condition informative about the past. So I've used the vocabulary, of course, in a casual way here. Being more careful, one would say that it's not the creature that reads the information. It's us understanding that the reason nature selected that response to this trace, or the reason that creatures who produced that response to this trace survived, is because this trace carries information about something to which that response is appropriate. And that's the clue. Because there are macroscopic regularities that link what has happened to what will happen that aren't screened off by the macroscopic present, there's a selective advantage to utilizing the information in the environment. Like the deer and the beaver, we rely uncritically on records for information about the past in our daily lives. The foundations of thermodynamics, that is the low entropy boundary condition in the past, the statistical postulate that underlies aggregate behavior, makes the physical facts that underwrite that reliance on records explicit. If the universe didn't start in a low entropy state, the local macroscopic environment wouldn't carry any more information about the past than it did about the future. Footprints in the sand and half-melted ice cubes and glasses would have been much more likely, of course, to have fluctuated out of equilibrium by chance than to have evolved from a more ordered state. All of this is possible because the entropic gradient makes information about the macroscopic past readily available. So again, think of it this way: facts about the past, although long gone, leave an imprint on the current macro state of a system that can, in its turn, be used to regulate local processes. So even though the microprocesses are all local and Markov, we can see higher level processes that effectively build causal bridges between past at some remove and the present by utilizing the information-bearing properties of macrostates in the presence of a low entropy boundary condition in the past. So people often speak as though it's an accidental fact about us that we have sense organs that track macroscopic information, and that the temporally asymmetric features of the world as we experience it are artifacts of our perspective, so that those temporal asymmetries are sometimes thought to be purely a product of the lenses through which we view the world. But putting it this way gets the wrong emphasis. It leads people to think that the asymmetries are not sort of there in the world, but in us. We get the right emphasis, I think, by asking why are organs coupled to macro information. After all, our bodies are full of various kinds of microscopic information. The surface of your skin responds to microscopic variations in temperature in the environment. The lining of your stomach responds to the presence of microbes. The natural answer is that once we are given the macroscopic state of a system, conditionalizing on the microstate doesn't typically, almost never, affect the probabilities for the macroscopic future. So that means that once you know the macroscopic state of a system, you've almost certainly extracted everything that there is to know about its macroscopic future. The only way you can make a difference to the additional microscopic information can help is if the system is on an entropy decreasing trajectory. And you'd have to have really bad luck for that to happen. So it's not just an accident that our sense organs, the sensors in particular that send information to the higher level cognitive processes, are coupled to the world's macroscopic structure. The macroscopic perspective effectively filters out the noise, revealing the information-rich patterns. The patterns are there. We emerge to exploit them. So if we step back and take a sort of take a cross-section of the world ordered by scale and look at the layers of structure from the microscopic all the way up to the level of the human being interacting with the macroscopic environment, we see something like this. There's the geometry of space-time, which imposes, or if you like, embodies constraints on the causal connectability of events. There's the matter content, the temporally symmetric microscopic laws that tell us the state of the world at one time, how the state of the world at one time relates to its state at the next. In the presence of the asymmetric boundary conditions, these give rise to macroscopic asymmetries of thermodynamics. The macroscopic asymmetries, in their turn, support the emergence of creatures that use information to guide behavior. Now, over time in the evolution of these kinds of creatures, there's a developmental trajectory that leads from simple creatures that respond to local traces in the environment, so the smell of prey, the sound of danger, to ones with increasingly sophisticated ways of tracking and processing information. The existence of longer-term and higher-order regularities gives a selective advantage to creatures with memories that can track those regularities and exploit the information that they contain. So we are, of course, a product of this developmental trajectory. We're soft and we're slow and we're weaker than we should be for our size. The thing that allows us to survive is that we have some very special equipment for gathering and utilizing information. All living systems, to the extent that they use information to guide behavior, feed off of the thermodynamic gradient. Some systems rely on the low-lying fruit, wiring motor responses to information-carrying triggers in the environment. So gazelles respond to smells left by passing predators. Ants will follow pheromone trails leading to food. Human beings go after the sweeter fruit in higher branches. We accumulate large bodies of information, process it in complex ways, and put the information to unlimited, flexible use. So you might wonder where along this trajectory agency gets started. Are bees and butterflies agents? Baboons and raccoons are only humans? So take your pick. I think lots of things happen along the developmental trajectory of importance, and they all matter. You have to make some choices about what you think is essential to agency to draw a line. Likewise, I think there's no clear point where mere information processing ends and cognition begins. If we line up biological systems from the simple to the complex, we can discern a line of development again in which there's an increasing amount of internal activity between stimulus and response. That is to say, more and more activity decoupled from the environment and designed to support the uptake and use of information, specifically designed to do that. And it becomes convenient to move from talking about physical processes to talking about cognitive processes. By the time that we get to the human being, large amounts of neural machinery are devoted not to the direct control of action, but to the trafficking and routing of information in the brain, and we almost instinctively trade the physical vocabulary for more cognitive informational description. It's not that the physical vocabulary becomes inapplicable, it's just that the vocabulary that highlights the information processing becomes more illuminating. So although it's true that what happens at high levels is emergent from what's going on At the microscopic level, it's also true that the low-level processing in the brain of an evolved organism is the way it is because of the high-level information processing dynamics that it supports. Brains are systems that are designed to process information. So here, I think the Zathmar and Smith insight is absolutely central. In modeling the evolution of the biosphere, information processing takes center stage because it turns out to be vital to selection. Nature finds increasingly sophisticated ways of channeling information and using it to guide behavior. I think it's natural to say that intelligence emerges when the information is made explicit and put to creative, flexible use. I can say more about that, but I won't right now. Let me say a few words, though, about information, because it's come up in all kinds of different contexts over the last couple of days. Information is a non-fundamental concept whose importance surfaces in understanding an evolutionary development of which we ourselves, information utilizers par excellence, are a product. And it's often complained in the philosophical literature and some of the physics literature, either that the notion is not well defined, or that it's intentionally laden, and that's just a philosophical label meant to signal a cluster of features usually associated with human-style notions of mental content that are difficult to cash out in physical terms. And I think the trick here is not to insist on a single notion of information and expect it to do all of the work at every level of that sort of hierarchy. Don't start with the rich, intentionally laden concept and expect it to apply all the way down to fundamental physics. Start with a rudimentary, stripped-down notion of information that applies in the austere setting of material structures where we're just talking about something like context relative correlations between the states of physical systems, and then show how we get increasingly rich notions of information that apply first to biological systems, then to cognitive systems, enriching it at every step so that once we have systems that are processing information in ways that involve evolved forms of social intelligence, so creatures like us begin to look recognizably intentional. It's precisely because the notion of information spans the space between physics and phenomenology that it's so useful, I think, in bringing the pieces together. So seeing how the notion arises first in rudimentary form and gets increasingly articulated as put to different kinds of use might be the clue to why the bottom seems to fall out, why attempts to define the notion from the bottom up seem to fall short of the mark. Information as we know it is situated at the interface between a natural environment and an intelligent agent. Understanding it requires attention both to the purely natural, unarticulated flow of information from the bottom and the intelligent processes that structure it and put it to use from the top. That does not mean that information is not physical in a wide sense, or that the narrowly physical notion of information doesn't capture everything that's needed for the purposes of the physicist. It only means that it doesn't provide a complete analysis of the notion as it figures in things like, for example, language or thought. It also means that questions that one might want to ask and that we've become accustomed to having answers to when speaking in terms of physical quantities don't have sharp answers. I'm going to speak super fast. Okay, so for example, I said when talking about the deer who flees at the scent of a wolf for the reason who flees at the scent of a wolf, that the reason that this response was selected to that stimulus was that the stimulus contains information that makes the response appropriate. So you might say, does the deer possess that information? Where exactly is the information? Is it in the stimulus? Is it in the deer's head? I think whether the deer has the information is going to depend, on the one hand, on what it can do with it. Can it combine it with other information, detach it from the stimulus, use it to guide a wide variety of behaviors? And on which of these we want to make the requirement for the possession of information. And the facts in virtue of which that stimulus carries this information aren't localized either in the deer or the stimulus. They're distributed across all of the pieces of the puzzle that need to be assembled in the right way: the thermodynamic gradient, the local constraints, the design process. And notice those facts aren't generally visible to the creatures who use information to guide behavior. They emerge from the side-on perspective that takes in the whole vista. If we let the idea that the important transitions happen when information previously lost to noise is made available to do causal work, guide how we look at the progression from complexity through information processing and utilization to agency, it's easy to see the emergence of culture is entirely continuous with this development. In a world like ours, of course, the collective environment is littered not only with natural artifacts like fossils and footprints, but culturally accumulated records like books, libraries, and scientific databases. These are the amassed products of a history of creative exploration placed literally at your fingertips. They contain not just information about the past, but records of what we've learned from it, lessons and inventions, and all of the creative bounty of a collective history that we have had the wisdom to preserve and pass on to our children. A moment's reflection will make it clear that the lion's share of our power as a species comes from our access to this accumulated storehouse of knowledge. Wipe it away and we're soft, weak, and vulnerable. Again, here we see the pattern above. New forms of organization, allowing information previously lost to noise be captured, made to do causal work. Okay, I don't need to say more in this setting that science, more than any other human enterprise, exemplifies this cross-generational accumulation of knowledge and information, takes lots of different forms. If we see farther, it is less because we stand on the shoulders of giants than that we stand on the shoulders of lots and lots of little people just like us.